Imagine a man who proclaimed himself emperor of one of the poorest countries in the world. He spent $2 million on his own coronation while children starved to death in the streets, and kept lions and crocodiles to punish his enemies. It sounds like fiction. Unfortunately, this is the true story of Jean-Bédel Bokassa, the most deranged dictator Africa has ever known. And if you think you've already heard absurd stories about tyrants, get ready, because nothing compares to what you're about to discover. Stay with me until the end, because this journey into the mind of a megalomaniac will leave you speechless. And since we're starting this journey together, why not hit the like button to support our channel and subscribe so you don't miss more incredible stories like this? It was February 22nd, 1921, in the small village of Bangui, deep in the equatorial forest of the Central African Republic. Jean-Bédel Bokassa was born, one of 12 children of a local tribal chief. No one could have imagined that this boy would become one of the most terrifying figures in African history. Fate had cruel plans for Bokassa. At 6 years old, his life was shattered by a trauma that would forever shape his violent personality. His father was brutally beaten to death in the office of the local French mayor for protesting against the forced labor imposed by the colonial regime. A week later, his mother, broken by grief, committed suicide, leaving 12 children orphaned. The family decided Bokassa should receive a French education. At school, he constantly faced cruel taunts about the tragic fate of his parents. Though short in stature, Bokassa was physically strong and quickly learned to defend himself with his fists. A missionary, realizing the young man had no aptitude for study or religion, suggested a military career. In 1939, Bokassa enlisted in the French army. Military life suited him perfectly. During World War II, he rose rapidly through the ranks, serving with distinction. When peace was restored, he decided to remain in the army, which offered rare opportunities for an African youth. In 1950, he was sent to French Indochina as a communications specialist, where he found himself amid one of the bitterest anti-colonial wars of the century. During his stay in Southeast Asia, he married a 17-year-old Vietnamese girl named Nguyen Thi, who gave him a daughter named Martine. When he was transferred to Europe, he left his wife and daughter behind, believing he would return. In 1959, Bokassa was assigned to Bangui, capital of the Central African Republic. After 20 years away, he returned home a completely transformed man. When the country gained independence in 1960, its first president was David Decalo, Bokassa's cousin. In 1964, at age 42, Bokassa was appointed Chief of Staff of the National Army. Bokassa was convinced he was destined for greatness. He had charisma, but also a fatal flaw, extreme vanity and an enormous ego. At state events, he insisted on standing next to the president during public ceremonies, causing bitter disputes with the official protocol. Initially, President Decalo found his cousin's antics amusing, but he gravely underestimated him. In 1965, Decalo publicly humiliated Bokassa during an official dinner, saying he only wants to collect medals and is too stupid to carry out a coup. Sensing the threat, Decalo tried to balance power by creating an armed police force. In mid-1965, he sent Bokassa to Paris and later forbade his return. Months later, under French pressure, Decalo relented and allowed Bokassa to come back. In December, Decalo approved budget increases for the police while rejecting the military budget proposed by Bokassa. On the fateful night of December 31, 1965, Bokassa carried out his coup. Meeting little resistance, he seized power while Decalo was away from the palace. When the president tried to return, he was captured and imprisoned. Bokassa embraced him and said, "I tried to warn you, but now it's too late." On January 2, 1966, Bokassa formed the Revolutionary Council, abolished the National Assembly, and scrapped the Constitution. At first, his regime wasn't especially brutal. His early policies included improving meat supplies, public transport, and women's rights. Bokassa finally had power, prestige, and recognition. In October 1966, he made a megalomaniacal statement, "I am everywhere and nowhere. I see nothing, yet I see everything." Such is the role of a head of state. His image began appearing everywhere, and buildings were renamed in his honor. He promoted himself to general, then marshal, insisting on wearing so many medals that special uniforms had to be designed. One story says that when he met Idi Amin, he wore a uniform sparkling from neck to knee with all the medals he had invented for himself. Amin was so enraged he ordered his jewelers to create a comparable display. Under his rule, every whim became policy. He controlled everything: promotions, punishments, and ministerial decisions. Using government funds, he bought valuable properties across Europe, including a 50-room mansion in Paris. Bokassa had wild eccentricities. In 1972, he joined in the public beating of 45 thieves in the main square. 3 died, and the survivors were displayed for 6 hours under the blazing sun. To celebrate Mother's Day, he ordered all imprisoned mothers released, and those accused of matricide executed. Throughout his life, he never forgot the daughter he had abandoned in Vietnam. With the help of the French consulate, he searched for Martine. First, they found an impostor, whom Bokassa adopted out of magnanimity. The real Martine was later found working in a cement factory. Bokassa offered both women in marriage through his vast public network. Tragically, the husband of the false Martine tried to assassinate him and was executed. The impostor Martine also disappeared, likely murdered. Despite his erratic behavior, Bokassa maintained cordial relations with France. The French propped up his regime with military and financial aid. He developed a close friendship with French President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, who loved hunting in Bokassa's private forests, killing dozens of elephants and other animals. Bokassa's strength was his staunch anti-communism during the Cold War, crucial for France, which feared other African nations turning to Moscow. Under Giscard's presidency, the French indulged Bokassa's grandest delusions. Trying to emulate Napoleon, his idol and inspiration, he declared the Republic an empire and himself emperor of 2 million people. The coronation took place on December 4, 1977, in Bangui's sports stadium. From France, he ordered all the royal regalia: a diamond crown, a golden eagle-shaped throne, antique carriages, purebred horses, coronation robes, tons of food and wine, fireworks, and 60 Mercedes-Benz cars for guests. Entering the coronation hall, Emperor Bokassa wore a white robe with national-colored stripes and a golden laurel crown. He ascended a giant eagle-shaped throne with a 13-meter wingspan, 800 golden feathers, and a seat carved from the bird's belly. To the sounds of Mozart and Beethoven, Bokassa, aged 56, crowned himself and then placed a smaller crown on his 28-year-old wife, Catherine. From that moment on, he would be known as Bokassa I. The spectacle cost $22 million in a country with high infant mortality, widespread illiteracy, and only 260 kilometers of paved roads. The French paid most of the cost, brushing off universal criticism. Bokassa later said, "It was the least the French could do for my service as a soldier." His violent behavior escalated during the 1970s. The list of victims at Nicaragua prison grew steadily. The prison director testified, "From 1976 to 1979, I executed dozens of people under Bokassa's orders. He held mock trials at his villa, sentencing men to be killed by lions or crocodiles." The end came in January 1979, with student protests against an imperial decree requiring them to buy school uniforms made by the Bokassa family. The demonstrations turned into riots, which were brutally crushed. Dozens of students were taken to Nicaragua prison. 30 were crammed into a one-person cell. Another group of 20 suffered the same fate. By morning, many were dead. Witnesses claimed Bokassa personally beat and killed students. The French media dubbed him the Butcher of Bangui. Unable to bear the shame any longer, France decided to remove him. On September 20th, while Bokassa was visiting Libya, French troops flew to Bangui and reinstalled David Decalo as president. Bokassa sought asylum in France but was rejected and fled to Ivory Coast. Tried in absentia in 1980, he was charged with murder and cannibalism and sentenced to death. While in exile, he wrote an autobiography revealing diamond gifts given to Giscard d'Estaing. These revelations helped bring down Giscard in the 1981 elections. After 4 years in Ivory Coast, Bokassa settled in Paris. In 1986, feeling nostalgic, he returned to the Central African Republic, where he was tried, found guilty of murder but acquitted of cannibalism, and sentenced to death. The sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment and then to 20 years. After 7 years, he was released, spending his final years in Bangui on a French army pension. Jean-Bédel Bokassa died in 1996 at the age of 75 and was buried in an unmarked grave. Bokassa's story is not just that of a megalomaniacal dictator. It is also a reflection of the colonial legacy and the complex realities of post-independence Africa. His 14-year reign of terror left scars that still endure today. Bokassa represents the archetype of a leader corrupted by absolute power. His transformation from a disciplined soldier into an emperor who kept lions as executioners illustrates how unchecked authority leads to total moral decay. Even more disturbingly, his story exposes the complicity of Western powers in supporting brutal dictators when it serves their geopolitical interests. His extravagant coronation, costing $22 million in one of the poorest nations on earth, remains a grotesque symbol of misrule. While children starved in the streets, Bokassa spent a fortune on a Napoleonic fantasy that existed only in his deranged imagination. His case also highlights how childhood trauma can shape leaders in destructive ways. The brutal death of his father and his mother's suicide left deep psychological scars, manifested in an obsession with power and a compulsive need for recognition. The regime's brutality, exemplified by student massacres and public executions, demonstrates how dictators use terror as a political tool. Ultimately, his downfall came not through a popular uprising, but through intervention by the very power that had sustained him for years. The Central African Republic never truly recovered from the Bokassa years, remaining one of the poorest and most unstable countries in the world. His legacy stands as a grim reminder of how one individual can devastate an entire nation. If this journey into the mind of one of history's most bizarre dictators impressed you, don't forget to leave a like to support our channel and subscribe for more stories about fascinating figures from African history. The story of Bokassa endures as an eternal warning about the dangers of absolute power and the vital importance of strong democratic institutions.